All right, so this lecture is going to talk about only the eye, and we're going to start with letter A, the lacrimal apparatus. So let's start with the word lacrimal, which means tears, and our tear production begins in the lacrimal gland. So let's take a look at this. Lacrimal gland is going to rest in the superolateral aspect of our orbit. It's going to nestle in a little fossa within the frontal bone. And so our tears are created here in this gland. Now, the gland will have ducts that move the tears into the eye. The tears will wash over the eye, okay? And then the tears will move into small little holes. And if you look in the mirror, maybe you've noticed this, I think women notice this more than guys because maybe, we're putting on eye makeup. But there are two little holes here in the corner of our eyes, and those are called lacrimal punctum. So think of the word puncture, right? They're punctum, and they're going to drain the tears into tiny little canaliculi, right? So the superior and inferior canaliculus here. And then it's going to drain those tears into this sac. So this is called the lacrimal sac right here, sac for the tears. And then the sac for the tears will move those tears into the nose. So there's a canal, a duct. This is called the nasolacrimal duct. And the duct will open into the nasal cavity. So when every day you're making tears, and tears are always draining in small little amounts into your nose. It's a reason when I say this, right? A lot of people say, oh, that's why your nose runs when you cry. And yes, you're producing more tears when you're crying, and those more tears are draining into your nose, and your nose will get runny. So I just want to refresh your memory. So remember this bone here in the orbit. This is called the lacrimal bone. And that hole in the lacrimal bone you had to know too, that was called the nasolacrimal canal, which is why I kind of said canal here. But the duct is the soft tissue that runs through the canal and drains your tears. So everything here that makes the tears and moves the tears and drains the tears is known as the lacrimal apparatus. All right, so let's take a look at our conjunctiva. Letter B. So the conjunctiva is going to be a mucous membrane that covers your eyes, except for where you have the iris here. So the colored portion of your eye is not covered by this mucous membrane, but the white portions are. So when you look at your eyes and you see those blood vessels and you see some kind of, vasculature on the eye, that doesn't belong to the white of your eye. The white of your eye doesn't have those blood vessels. It's that tissue, this conjunctiva on top, that does. So let's take a look at another picture. So this is a nice image of a person's eye. So you can really see those tiny, very small blood vessels, right? That's the conjunctiva's vascular system. And then we have the iris, which is clear of conjunctiva. So the cornea does not have conjunctiva. So the second sentence down here. So I'm using the word iris, and actually I want to correct myself. I really should say cornea, because this colored portion of your eye is actually inside your eye. On the outside, if you wear contact lenses, you would put your contact lens on your cornea. So this clear, very tough connective tissue covering of the front of your eye here, that's the cornea. So you don't have the conjunctiva there because this cornea has to be very clear to allow light in. So the iris is the colored part of your eye, and you see this black hole, that's your pupil, but that's literally a hole. There's not a black disc that exists there. It's a hole, and it's black because the inside of your eye is dark. Okay, so there's no light on inside your eye, so it's going to look black. So let me show you another picture of this. All right, so this is a really great image to know. Pretty much all the structures of your eye you're going to need to know in this image. But let me just show you this cornea, right? So the cornea is going to stick out a little bit rounder than the rest of the eye, and it's going to be very clear. Basically, it's almost all cartilage. It's collagen. Clear collagen. The pupil is a gap. It's a space. And the iris is going to be that colored part of your eye that makes a circle. So if we cut your eye in this mid-sagittal view, Your iris will have a piece of your iris up here. We're going to have a gap in the middle, and then where your pupil is, and then we'll have the rest of the iris coming around. Okay, so the conjunctiva, let's find it here. The conjunctiva is pink. So it's this layer, right, that's on top of your eye. It stops before it hits the retina, and it's going to cover your eye, and it's going to do a loop inside your eyelid and then also cover your eyelid. So remember that word palpebrae. This is the palpebral conjunctiva that's on your inner eyelid and the ocular conjunctiva that's on your eye. Notice how this conjunctiva creates a loop and it blocks any foreign objects from going back into your eye. Same thing down here in your lower eyelid. Your ocular conjunctiva and the palpebral conjunctiva literally forms a physical barrier. So if you ever get something in your eye and you're afraid it might go behind your eye or get lost in your brain somewhere, it's not possible because the conjunctiva is forming a physical barrier. So eventually, whatever you have up here, if it's a contact lens that you lost or it's a small little piece of debris that's in your eye, it will come out. It might take a little while, but it'll come out. Your tears will wash it out, right? The conjunctiva can get inflamed. That's called conjunctivitis. And the conjunctivitis is called pink eye. For lots of you guys, you've heard of pink eye before, or sometimes it's called red eye. But that causes your eyes to look red, right? So all of this mucous membrane here will be pink or red because it's aggravated. And there's lots of causes of conjunctiva. It can be viral, bacterial, or even just kind of an irritating substance can cause conjunctivitis. So the overall job of the conjunctiva is a protective barrier. It also secretes a little bit of tears, right? A little bit of to create like moisture for your eyes so your eyes doesn't get dry. And yeah, I think that's about it for conjunctiva. It does help prevent microbes from, also that microbes from entering into your eye. Okay, so let's take a look at the layers of your eye itself. So letter C. Let's take a look at the fibrous tunic. That's actually, let's look at this. So this is the very, very outside of your eye. The entire layer is called the fibrous tunic. So tunic means layer. It's the old word for layer. Fibrous means very tough, the outer part of your eye. There's two portions to your fibrous tunic, the sclera and also the cornea. The vascular tunic is vascular, so it's going to have a blood supply. In this example, we're looking at the choroid. We'll look at that in a second. And then there's the neural tunic. That's the nervous tissue. And that is just the retina. So we have three layers of the eye, right? On the outside, it's tough. Inside, it's vascular. Or in the middle, it's vascular. On the very inside, it's your neural layer or your retina. So let's take a look at the fibrous tunic first. The fibrous tunic, so number one, A, sclera. The sclera is the white of the eye. So here's that word. All of this that protects the back of the eye, all the way up to the front of the eye is your sclera. This is white. So this is the white of your eye. It's made of collagen and elastic fibers. It's thicker at the back of the eye. And I'm sorry to say that you're not going to be dissecting an eye this semester because of coronavirus, but it's really fun. This is one of those labs that students tend to really enjoy, cutting into the eye. And you really, when you cut into the eye, it is very difficult. This fibrous tunic is pretty tough. The front of the eye, so notice how the sclera just becomes the cornea, right? So that's why it's all the same layer. But what's different about the cornea is that it's clear and it's not white, and it's clear so that it allows light to come in through the pupil of your eye. So the cornea itself is avascular. It doesn't have a blood supply because you cannot have blood vessels to obscure your vision. So it depends on getting nourished through the watery component on the back of it. So you notice that there's a cavity here, which is called the anterior chamber of the the entire region. So back here and over in here, it's called the anterior cavity. But this cavity is divided into two parts. The posterior chamber is behind the iris, and the anterior chamber is in front of the iris. And I just want to make that clear. We're going to talk about that again. But So the two chambers, this entire anterior cavity of the eye, which is divided from the posterior cavity by this lens, all of this is filled with aqueous humor. This is a watery substance that does have oxygen and does have some nutrients in it, so it can nourish the cornea from behind. And then anteriorly, the oxygen that's just in the air kind of feeds the cornea of your eye. So the cornea is regenerative. If you scratch your cornea or damage the cornea, it can regenerate. So it has to have nourishment and oxygen come in so the cells that are alive there can replace the collagen. So that's all I have to say about the cornea. And let's talk about number 2, the vascular tunic. So the vascular tunic is going to contain 3 different things. Let's start with the iris. So the iris is the colored portion of your eye, like I mentioned before. And what the iris really is a smooth muscle. Actually, I should say 2 smooth muscles. So let's look at the iris. So the iris has an inner circular muscle called the constrictor muscles, or you can call them sphincter muscles. The iris also has an outer radiating muscle band, right? So these are called dilator muscles or radial muscles. And what these muscles do, these smooth muscles, which you cannot control by yourself, right? Or their autonomic nervous system, that doesn't make any sense, but they're controlled by the autonomic nervous system. They're going to mediate how much light enters the back of the eye. So we've all probably experienced on a very, very bright day, or if you're on a sunny day and there's snow on the ground, how all of that super bright light entering our eye blinds us. So our eyes didn't evolve to accept a lot of light. And also dim lighting it's hard for us to see, obviously. So there is this range of light that makes vision optimized. And so your iris is going to control that light so that we have optimal light coming into the eye. So let's look at the dilators, right? So the dilators, these outer muscles here, when they contract, they're going to pull open the pupil. So the pupil, this hole, right, gets bigger, and so it allows more light into the eye. So what conditions would these radiator or dilator muscles contract? It would contract under dark conditions, right? You want more light to enter the eye because it's dim. In the opposite sort of scenario, if you have a lot of light, it's a bright day, what's going to happen is that these sphincter muscles are going to contract and they're going to close down on our pupil to make their pupil smaller so that all that excessive light doesn't come into the eye and makes washes out our vision basically, right? So those are the 2 smooth muscles of our iris. So you definitely want to know that they are there and what they do. And this is a really awesome picture of the eye, close-up iris. So you can see that the texture of the iris here, and the color of our eye is dependent on the type of melanin that's embedded into our eye and into the iris. And you should also realize that, or not also realize, but this is what I usually say to the class, there's more than just, melanin comes in browns, and eye color comes in blues and greens and hazels. So we don't have blue or green or hazel melanin. But when melanin is deposited into your iris deeper down, it actually reflects a blue wavelength. So if you have blue eyes, it means that you have relatively little melanin because it's a light color, but it's set deeper in the iris so that when the sunlight hits your iris, the wavelengths that bounces out that other people see is actually a blue color. It's kind of interesting. Anyways, but this is that textured smooth muscle, and then this pupil is literally a hole. And what I love to think about is if I was really small, if you're shrunken down and just standing here, you could just crawl into this person's inner eye because it's a hole. You can see that the cornea is almost invisible because it's so nice and clear right on top of that eye. Okay, so let's take a look at letter B, the choroid. Oops. So the choroid is going to be our middle layer that is sandwiched between the sclera and the retina, and it's dotted like this because it has a lot of blood vessels. It's the vascular tunic. As the choroid comes up anteriorly, it expands into another smooth muscle structure. This area that's also this black area, this is all the same thing. This is called the ciliary body. And this is very important. So what is this ciliary body, the smooth muscle here, doing? Well, it controls the shape of the lens, and it holds onto the lens with these little tiny fibers you can see here and you can see down here. Those are called suspensory ligaments. And the lens is responsible for focusing. So when you look at something far away and then you switch to something close up, the lens actually changes shape. And it changes shape because it's forced to by the ciliary body. So this is under, again, autonomic control. It's a smooth muscle, but that is what this does. So the focusing, a word for focusing is called accommodation. So when you accommodate, you are focusing, right? And there's another term here I want you guys to know. This is, you need to know everything on this diagram basically. But the ora serrata is this jagged border between the ciliary body and this orange layer, which is going to be the retina. Okay, so it's just this border, the ora serrata. All right, so let's see if so in animals, and you'll watch a dissection of a cow eye. So this is something that you would want to know. The back of the cow eye, the choroid has a very shiny layer called the tapetum lucidum. And we don't have that as humans. So it turns out that animals that have are descended from the ancestors that are nocturnal animals, they have a shiny component to their choroid which reflects light. So in dark light conditions or dim light conditions like at night, the little bit of light that comes into the eye gets bounced around in this tapetum lucidum, and it creates more light inside their eye so that they can see better at night. So when you ever look at a raccoon right in the dark, or if you take a picture of a raccoon, the flash of your camera, it flashes and reflects. That tapetum lucidum reflects it back. So your picture of a raccoon is going to have this white pupil because it's flashing back that flash from your camera. For us, for humans, when we have a flash, our pupils look red, right? It's called red eye. And that's because we don't have this shiny tapetum to flash back light. We have a whole bunch of blood vessels in this choroid. So the red that you see is the blood in the back of our eye. So next time you take a picture and someone has red eye, right, that's the blood that is, you can see through their pupil because of that flash. So pretty interesting there. Okay, so the reason why, all right, let's talk about one more thing about the choroid, the melanin. So the choroid layer is pigmented. It's blood, it's got vascular blood vessels, but it's also pigmented. And the reason why the choroid is pigmented is because, like a theater, you can see the screen better when everything else is black. And so for the back of our eye, there is one region called the fovea where all of our acute vision is going to be focused like the theater screen. So the rest of the eye needs to be dark in order for this to be very clear. Okay, so the choroid has all this melanin, this pigment, to make it dark so that all the extra light in the eye gets absorbed and it doesn't create a lot of chaos or you know, impede the sharpness of our vision at this structure called the fovea. Okay. So the choroid is both vascular and pigmented. And if you were to dissect this, it's black in the cow eye, except for that region of the tapetum. All right, so we talked about everything here. The iris, we talked about the ciliary body that attaches to the lens and changes the shape of the lens for focusing. And then we talked about the choroid. So all three of those structures are part of the, again, the vascular tunic. All right, let's move on to the neural tunic, which is the retina. So the neural tunic is layers of neurons embedded in one layer of pigmented melanocytes. So we can see we have one layer of melanocytes, again, to absorb excess light, right? We want to control the amount of light that's in the back of the eye, and it turns out the human eye doesn't really like all that much light. So there's our dark pigmented layer, and then we have several layers of neurons, 3 layers of major neurons that you guys need to know, and then there's other neurons there that I'm going to ignore. Okay, so you guys need to know these 3 basic layers. Number 1 is the photoreceptors, which are rods and cones. So the rods and cones have different jobs. The rods, which I have black, white, and gray, this responds to the amount of light. Is it very bright? Is it very dark? Is it in between? So this is just the quantity of light. And then this, so that gives you sort of black and white and gray vision. And then the cones give you the quality of the wavelengths coming in. So the cones can register the different wavelengths of light, and that basically is color. Color is different wavelengths of light. And so these photoreceptors are the only ones in your eye, in your retina, that actually detect photons of light. So light, if you look here, light comes in to the retina. It actually has to travel past a layer of ganglion cells, past a layer of bipolar cells, and then it can hit the rods and cones. The rods and cones, when they fire an action potential, they're going to synapse with our bipolar cells. The bipolar cells will then create an action potential themselves. They will synapse with the ganglion cells. The ganglion cells then will create another action potential that then travel through their long fibers back into the brain. Okay, so the question here, what nerve fibers make up the optic nerve? Well, if you just listen to what I was talking about, the ganglion cells have the fibers that go back into the brain. So these ganglion cell fibers are what create the optic nerve. All right, so letter B is your correct answer. It's the ganglion cells. All right, so let's take a look at the macula lutea, letter B, and the optic disc. So let's go back to our nice big eye picture here. So the retina is going to be this peachy or orangish layer of our inner eye. You can see that it does also have blood vessels, so the retina is vascularized. And there's, this is our fovea. So you have letter B, the macula lutea. This region, let me actually show you another picture of this. Yes, this is really great. This is an image of what your optometrist would see when they look in your eye. This is exactly what they see. So this is the retina. And the dotted area here is going to be called the macula lutea. Okay, this is where, when you look directly at something, this is where that image falls. So everything else, this is going to be considered your peripheral vision, right? What's outside of what you're directly looking at. But what you're looking at is here, this macula lutea. The fovea is a pit within the macula lutea that is all cones. It's just concentrated cones, and it's your most acute vision. So if you're looking very intently at something, that image is directly on your fovea. So this region is your direct area of focus, and everything else is periphery. This region is also very interesting. This is called your optic disc. It's also physiologically your blind spot. So just notice how these big blood vessels are coming out of it, right? Or I guess you can think also going into it. This is the region that the blood enters and exits your eye, right? Think of your eye as an egg. It's pretty much sealed, except there's one entrance and exit for blood, and that's going to be here at the optic disc. I want you guys now to look at this other image. This is the optic disc. Okay, so imagine we were looking at the eye from this direction, looking back here, and we saw the macula over here on the side, and we saw the bright optic disc. So what the optic disc is the region where we have the optic nerve forming and leaving the eyeball, and we have our nice big blood vessels coming in and out, nourishing the eye and taking away waste. So this area of the eye, since it's an entrance and exit, it's a portal, it does not get covered by the retina. So literally, you do not see in this area called the optic disc. You cannot form any vision there because it's just this entrance and exit. So I usually ask the class at this point, like, why is it that you can see the world completely seamlessly, right? We don't have a little blind spot in each of our eyes. And this is because our brain invents that little area. If you go to the internet and you type in blind spot test, it'll walk you through ways that you can actually see your blind spot. And you'll find that the brain will just fill in that blind spot according to what's around it. So if you're looking at a white piece of paper, you'll find your blind spot. It'll turn white because it's a white piece of paper. I'm not going to go too into it because it's hard to describe without seeing you guys in class. But I encourage you to go to blind spot test, or there's many of them on the internet. And if you follow the very quick directions, you can find your blind spot. All right, but that's it. Okay, so I think we've covered everything on this image. Yep, I think we did. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to take a look at now the cavities and chambers of the eye. So I think I have another image here. Yes. So this is a little bit of a blown up image of the anterior eye. So let's talk about the anterior cavity first. So the anterior cavity is everything in front of the lens. Okay, so I have, there's two chambers. So from the lens to the iris is called the posterior chamber. And then in front of the iris, all the way to the cornea, we have the anterior chamber. So there's two chambers that are found in the anterior cavity. Both of these chambers are filled with aqueous humor. Okay, so let's now talk about what makes aqueous humor. So I want to look at this region here. So this is the ciliary body again. Notice we have little arrows coming away. So that's our aqueous humor. So the aqueous humor is actually created by the ciliary body, and it oozes out into the posterior chamber here. You see how the arrow does a little oozing. So you have fluid that's basically being made behind the iris, and it's coming forward through your pupil and filling this space, right? And again, that aqueous humor helps to nourish the cornea. It also helps to keep a nice pressure behind the anterior eye. Okay, so there is a disorder here called the glaucoma. So there is a canal, right? You're always creating aqueous humor. So the ciliary body is basically from your blood. So your blood comes to the ciliary body. The fluid in the blood leaves your bloodstream. It gets modified by special cells here, and then it becomes aqueous humor. So you're always creating aqueous humor, so it has to drain. It's going to drain at the canal of Schlemm. Very fun word, okay? So it drains here, and if it doesn't drain, you're going to get extra pressure in the anterior cavity. This is bad because if you have fluid building up here, remember your eye is kind of like an egg. It doesn't expand. So what's going to give? Not your cornea. You can't expand forward, but it's going to push back. So the lens is going to get pushed back, and what's here in our posterior cavity? A jelly. So there's something called vitreous humor, okay, or vitreous body in our posterior cavity, and it's literally like a glob of jelly. So if you were to open your eye in the classroom, and you'll see it in the dissection video, there's jelly back there, and it's soft. And if you get this extra pressure pushing back on this jelly, let me go back up to the big picture here. All this is filled with jelly. This is going to be pushed back. It's going to compress backwards, right? So you have this extra pressure pushing back. It's going to push and compress these very delicate blood vessels that feed the retina. And if you're starving your retina of blood, you're going to kill those neurons, okay? So the condition of aqueous humor building up here is called glaucoma. And blindness is a possibility for people with untreated glaucoma because of this excessive pressure pushing back on the posterior eye, collapsing your blood vessels, and killing neurons. So glaucoma can be very, very bad, very dangerous. All right, so that was glaucoma, and that is what I wanted to talk about here with the ciliary body creating aqueous humor. All right, the posterior cavity, number 2, I already talked about. The vitreous humor is back here. Oh, but then why do we have this jelly? So this is interesting. Your retina is not attached to anything in the back of the eye. So I apologize, I'm going to go back up to this picture here. The retina, okay, is like if you just laid down a sheet onto your bed but didn't tuck it in, that's the retina. The retina just lays there. It is the jelly, it is the vitreous humor that's found inside of the back of your eye that keeps that retina in place. Okay, so it just pushes ever so gently on the retina so that it doesn't come out of place. A detached retina is pretty common. If you are in an accident and your head is hit really hard, some people just get this out of the blue. They can just genetically, they have detached retinas that run in their family. That retina, like your bed sheet, will just kind of come off, make a little fold or a ripple, and that's what's a detached retina. Of course, it's going to have bad effects with your vision, and there's ways to fix it, but that's something that's possible, and it's also an illustration of the importance of this vitreous humor in the back of the eye. All right, so let's take a look at the lens. So the lens is going to be these concentric rings of cells. They're going to be fibrous, and they are also clear. So the lens is a clear, transparent structure. It's kind of hard, but it allows light to penetrate through. So light will come in through the cornea, it goes through the aqueous humor, it goes through the pupil, and then it hits your lens, it goes through the lens, and then it goes on to the back of the eye. All throughout your life, you're putting on more and more layers of your lens. So if you think about changing the shape of something that's already kind of hard, the bigger it gets, the harder it's going to be to change the shape of it. So when people get older, they tend to need reading glasses. And this is one of those reasons why. It's because you're kind of putting on those all those layers. It never stops growing. And so it gets harder and harder to accommodate. Oh, okay, so this is I forgot I had this. So this is a picture of glaucoma. So this is your aqueous humor building up, the pressure building, pushing backwards onto your vitreous cavity and compressing the back of the eye. This is vision associated with glaucoma. And a question for you. Which of the following is or are functions of the vascular tunic of the eye? So I'm going to let you guys think about it. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and pause it and think about it, but I'm going to tell you the answer right now. It's all the above, okay? So the regulating the amount of light entering the eye, that's the job of the iris, which is part of the vascular tunic. Letter B, secreting and reabsorbing aqueous humor, that is the ciliary body, that is part of the vascular tunic. Controlling the shape of the lens, that's also ciliary body, okay? That's part of the vascular tunic. So D, all the above. All right, our last little letter E of our eye lecture is the visual pathway, okay? So from our retina, we know that the ganglion cells form our optic nerve. The optic nerve, which is not pictured here, will come and do a crisscross, right, forming the optic chiasm. The fibers then come back after the chiasm. Is called a tract, right? So those fibers of those ganglion cells will continue back via a tract called the optic tract. And then here, I want you to know the 3 basic areas that vision goes, okay? So letter A, some fibers synapse with the thalamus, okay? So here's our thalamus. And the thalamus will have optic radiations to reach the occipital cortex, right? The visual cortex. So remember, the thalamus is the relay station for all of our senses except for smell. So here's vision coming in, relaying with another neuron in our thalamus, and that neuron is going to create radiations that come to our occipital lobe where we interpret what we see, right? So that's 1. Letter B. some fibers will go and synapse with our superior colliculus. And this should actually make a lot of sense because our superior colliculus is for visual reflexes and controlling our unconscious eye movements, right? So we have to have some information coming from our eye so our brainstem knows where our eye should move. And then letter C, the third place, is the hypothalamus, where there's places it goes, but all I wanted to highlight is the pineal gland, because remember, the pineal gland creates melatonin, and melatonin levels rise when it's dark. It makes you feel sleepy. They go down when it's light. So how does your brain know if it's light or dark outside? It has to have visual information coming from your retina. Okay, so that's how we know. And then here is a really cool dissection of this, right? So we have the optic nerve, optic chiasm, optic tract. Here is radiations coming back to the occipital lobe. We have our superior colliculus. This lateral geniculate nucleus, this is just the thalamus, okay? And I think that concludes. Oh, color perception. Darn, I can't do this with you guys in class, but if you were to put a finger at the horizon line, hopefully you would see that both of these little squares turn gray, whereas without your finger there, there's a gray square on top and a white square on the bottom. But if you take away the information that goes to your brain that there's a horizon there and it just becomes one sort of unified picture, then you see the actual color of both of those squares. The actual color is the same, they're gray. But when when your brain interprets the holistic sort of scenario that's there, oh, we have this horizon, we have two squares, one looks like it's shadowing the other one because we have a shadow here, right? The artist put a shadow in. So then when we take a look at this, your brain changes, literally changes what color this bottom square should be. Okay, so they're really both of these colors. This dark gray is what this one is. But because of all the other information that your brain's getting at the same time, this horizon line, this shadow, your brain says, well, actually they can't be both dark gray because this one is in shadow. It should be a lighter color that's actually in shadow. So you see it bright white there, but then a shadowed version, but that doesn't exist. Your brain just made that up. Pretty cool. So that's what we mean by perception. Your perception is what your brain creates for you. Your reality is created by your brain. Your brain gets information from all your different senses, but at the end of the day, your brain tries to make sense of all this information coming in and sort of puts up for you the best fit scenario for you to understand and survive in the world. All right, I think that's it. Yeah, so this is another great picture. This is your eye. So your eye in the orbit it doesn't take up the entire orbit if you can remember your skull. So it's packed in with a lot of fat. So there's a lot of adipose that's been removed to show you the eye and the orbit. And then just some interesting things if you want to follow along. You see some cranial nerves, you see the optic nerve. You can actually see the cribriform plate here. So you can study this and kind of geek out on it if you like. All right, there's the ear.